The River Nile is the world's longest river. And it's where the world's first war over water could be fought. The first of its two great tributaries, the White Nile, flows from Lake Victoria. But our journey begins in Ethiopia, following the Blue Nile from Lake Tana, as it sweeps through Africa's Grand Canyon to where a dam is being built, close to the Sudan border. Lake Tana, the source of the river, is a place of myth and legend. It's the biggest lake in Ethiopia, and many of its 37 islands have their own monasteries. It's a very sacred place for Ethiopian Orthodox Christians. This monastery dates back to the 14th century. Some of these paintings are more than 400 years old. The Nile appears in the Old Testament, and legend has it that the Ark of the Covenant was briefly brought here. But all is not calm on these waters. The struggle for control of this great river is dividing the three countries that share it. The Nile is the bringer of life, and from where it launches itself downstream, it has the power to bring peace or bring war.
This is where the Blue Nile begins its long journey. From here up in the Ethiopian highlands, it will cut through caverns and canyons, cross floodplains through Sudan and Egypt as it emerges out in the delta of the Mediterranean Sea.
Around 85% of that water comes from here, and that's why a vast new dam being built in Ethiopia is dividing nations. This is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, and it's driving Ethiopia's ambitious plans for industrial revolution, to put its growing population to work, to power the region and to tame the river. But it's also at the heart of a row that's sucked in Sudan and Egypt and threatens peace in this part of Africa.
When it's finished, this will be the largest hydroelectric power station in Africa and one of the biggest dams on the continent. It will not only power this country, but the surrounding countries as well. And Ethiopia didn't even ask the countries downstream before it started building. That is the scale of this country's ambition.
After just 5 years of work, it's almost two-thirds complete.
This project is a project that is being built by Ethiopians, and that will benefit other African brothers, sisters, and other countries across the globe.
Engineer Simignu Bekele is the project manager. He says it's costing at least $4.5 billion, and that's probably an underestimate. He insists that downstream countries shouldn't worry, as it's not consuming any water.
This project is a hydroelectric project. It is a non-water consuming scheme project that is only dedicated to generate electricity. This shows how the government of Ethiopia, how the people of the nations are committed themselves to eradicate our common enemy, poverty.
The construction works are impressive. This second dam sweeps across a 5-kilometre valley, joining two mountains to create the edge of a vast reservoir. All this and a lot more will be flooded. Once finished and filled, it'll cover more than 1,800 square kilometres, larger than the size of Greater London. It'll flood the Blue Nile for nearly 250 kilometres upstream. If it's filled too fast, it'll reduce the amount of water that flows to Sudan and Egypt. Thousands of people have already been moved to make way for the lake. The power lines are ready and waiting for the electricity the dam will provide. 70% of Ethiopia, that's 70 million people, don't have any electricity. It's holding back the country's grand plans for development, and it's why people support a project they are paying for.
If we had electricity, we would be able to get what the village needs. For instance, the villagers here make a living by farming. But if we had electricity, we'd be able to create jobs on our own, including metal and woodwork. As well as that, we would also be able to own TVs, a fridge, and so many other things.
Modernization is already changing life in the capital, Addis Ababa. This is East Africa's first metro system. The amount of construction going on speaks volumes. Ethiopia wants to pull its people out of poverty, to create jobs and get over its historic image of drought and famine. It's Africa's fastest growing economy right now, but with a population set to double in 30 years, it needs to grow even faster just to keep up. Hence the need for cheap, renewable energy. But the cost of government ambition is human rights, freedom of speech and democracy. Protests across the country are being crushed. To the government, development is everything.
It's one of the most important flagship projects for Ethiopia. It is a project that is going to now reach the entire development and the transformation of the country. It's a very important energy project.
There is money to spend, and the minister says the people will pay for the dam through lotteries, contributions and taxes. And he insists that despite its fears, Egypt will get more rather than less water.
It's not about control of the flow. It's really about providing opportunity for us to develop ourselves through energy development. It has a lot of benefit for the downstream countries, basically.
Construction on the dam is going on around the clock. Such is the urgency to get this built and generating power. But because Ethiopia didn't consult with Sudan or Egypt before starting work during the Arab Spring, talks between the three countries keep collapsing. A new political order is emerging, and Egypt doesn't like it.
I've spoken to senior people in Ethiopia who've said that they're afraid of a war with Egypt over water, that they might bomb this dam. That's the level of anger. What do you think about that?
No, I don't think so. This kind of extreme type of ideas are not welcomed. This will not happen in this region, I'm sure. There is no recorded history which shows that war has erupted because of water. This water belongs to all of us. We have to develop it in a responsible way than thinking about war.
But whatever he says, the Blue Nile can now be controlled by Ethiopia. And that's a big concern for Egypt, when so much of the water that reaches Cairo comes from here. Sudan, however, its next stop, likes the look of the cheap electricity that's heading its way. The waters of the Nile bring life to Sudan. One of the world's biggest irrigation schemes was created here more than a century ago to grow cotton for Britain's Industrial Revolution. But now it's the Gulf states who need what Sudan can grow. The Blue Nile heads north through these vast irrigated lands to join the White Nile, before meandering through a desert steeped in ancient history. We're following it to ask if a row over who controls its flow could lead to war.
It's here in Khartoum that the Blue Nile and the White Nile meet and merge and then head north to Egypt. The river's travelled about a third of the way from its source to the sea, and it's growing in strength and in size. So what does Sudan, this vast country only now emerging from years of US sanctions, think about Ethiopia building this dam upstream? Well, it thinks it's a great idea.
Land is not in short supply, and with the power of the sun and the waters of the Nile, Sudan's agricultural potential is huge. This is alfalfa, top quality cattle feed, and this farm can cut 9 harvests a year for local cows, but primarily for export to the Middle East. Sudan has the right to take billions of gallons of water every year through old treaties with Egypt, but claims it hasn't been using its full allocation. The suggestion it now might is a source of tension with its northern neighbour. This farm is owned by the Nile Group, a massive private company that does everything from agriculture to mining, from cars to earth movers to healthcare.
I think GM is great.
Its owner is Osama Daoud, Sudan's richest man, who designed his own golf course in Khartoum.
For Sudan, it's wonderful. I mean, it's really the best thing that has happened for a long time. And I think the combination of energy and regular water levels is a great blessing.
Cheap electricity can be used for a lot more than just keeping your cows properly air-conditioned. It can bring faster development to Sudan, which is just emerging from decades of crippling US sanctions and wants to take advantage of the opportunities. What do you think about the row between Ethiopia and Egypt over this dam?
The Nile is the lifeline of Egypt. So for them, you know, it's they're, I wouldn't say paranoid, but they're very concerned about anything that to do with that water.
And the Nile is a lifeline to Sudan as well. Welcome to the first ever Festival of Music and Culture at Kamakol village. Kamakol is about half a day's drive north of Khartoum. It was abandoned 20 years ago, the mud houses left without roofs, as the villagers moved away from the riverbanks to avoid catastrophic flooding.
والله إلى حد ما في جزء له علاقة بالفيضان لأنه الناس
Salwa Saeed Magni remembers two huge floods that struck when she was a child. Her father was mayor. This was their house.
والله كان يعني الناس هنا في المنطقة اللي هنا الورانا دي المراكب كان بتجي حتى.
It's an image from my life I will never forget. When the 1976 flood hit, it was during the date harvest. So people used boats to collect the dates from the palms. It lasted 3 weeks.
The whole village left, but now a dam upriver regulates the flow of water so it doesn't flood as high. That means they can hold festivals here, and also that people can move back to this village, especially if there's cheap electricity on the way. It's a time of change in Khartoum, with the lifting of sanctions and protests over increasing inflation, but there's a strong cafe culture where big issues of the day are discussed. Most people here are in favour of the Ethiopian dam because of what it'll bring to Sudan.
Our understanding, our experience showed that any storage upstream is a blessing in general to the downstream countries, especially if the intention is power generation.
Do you think there's politics between the changing fortunes of the three countries?
I mean, water in general is becoming highly politicized, not only in this region but elsewhere. And but I think if there is always, as our case between the three countries, if the political will is around, involving the high up authorities in the three countries, I think it will work out.
He's diplomatic, but this is far from resolved. Talks between the three countries have collapsed, and tensions across the whole region are growing as a result of it. The rivalries go back to the time of the pyramids, the Sudanese pyramids. This is Jebel Bakal, and these are more than 2,000 years old. For a short time in history, the Nubian Kush Empire ruled Egypt from here. This was their capital. Powers rise and fall, but all are linked by one great river.
Well, this is Egypt, the next stop on our trip, and what a way to see it. We're flying in a hot air balloon over Luxor. The temples are all around us. It's 6:30 in the morning, the sun is just coming up. It's a stunning way to see this country. The reason we're here is to try and understand, to get an explanation of why it is Egypt is so opposed to this dam that Ethiopia is building way up the Nile.
Even though Egypt built the Aswan High Dam for its own development, it's angry with Ethiopia's plan. From the history at Luxor, we'll follow the river north to Cairo and then on to the delta, the heart of the country's agriculture, where water really is everything. The pharaohs used to worship the river as a god. Egypt, they said, was the gift of the Nile. Civilizations flourished here on the banks of the river. These temples represent thousands of years of wealth and power. They're part of Egypt's proud national identity. You don't take something so set in stone and accept another country damming the Nile upstream and threatening your lifeline.
The ancient Egyptians, they considered the Nile as lifeblood. Actually, we can say the Nile for the ancient Egyptian, it was the life itself. Why? Because they used the Nile for everything. The Nile was the life and still is the life for the Egyptian people in Egypt.
And decades ago, Egypt decided the best way to protect its interests was to build a dam. Work on the Aswan High Dam began in 1960 and took 10 years. It created the giant Lake Nasser, more than 5,000 square kilometers, nearly 3 times bigger than the new Ethiopian reservoir will be. It regulated the flooding of the Nile, generated power, and allowed vast agricultural lands to be irrigated. Tens of thousands of Nubian people were forced from their homes, and an ancient Egyptian temple had to be moved brick by brick. But it was a symbol of great pride, a nationalist project projecting power for revolutionary post-colonial Egypt. It's certainly been good for Wahhabi, who at 60 has been a fisherman on the Nile for 40 years, like his father and grandfather before him.
هذا حياتنا ورزقنا ومعيشنا عليه النيل. يعني معيشنا كأسرة إحنا هنيت على النيل.
Our life and our livelihood depends on the Nile. We as a family live by the river. We fish. We grow crops on the islands in the Nile. Our cattle are fed from the Nile. All our food is from the Nile.
Wahhabis heard about the dam in the Egyptian media, that Ethiopia wants to control the Nile and its flow will be affected. But he's skeptical.
They say the water we get won't be affected, but only God knows what could happen. If they dam the river, there will be wars and fighting.
And there are even bigger concerns downstream in chaotic Cairo. Egypt relies on the Nile for almost all its water, but its population is growing fast. And the United Nations is warning there'll be water shortages by 2025 because of wastage and pollution. But the government argues it's already recycling water, using it efficiently and importing wheat rather than using water to grow it. Egypt's water minister says one big threat is climate change.
The second threat is the unilateral action in the upstream countries, building infrastructure without consideration of the downstream impacts, severe impacts. And this is another threat if not coordinated well.
So how angry are you?
Extremely angry, because we are responsible for a nation that is about 100 million. Just one key thing that I would mention to you. If the water that's coming to Egypt reduced by 2%, you know what does this mean? Lost about 200,000 acres of land. 1 acre at least makes one family survive. A family in Egypt, the average family size is about 5 persons. So this means that about 1 million will be jobless.
He says that means more migrants heading to Europe and more people to be recruited by terror groups.
All Europe and Egypt is suffering from what is happening in Syria, in Libya, and other countries. So what if Egypt is added to these countries? What will happen? So it is an international security issue.
Experts say Egypt has the right to be angry. A dam was being discussed, but Ethiopia started building without telling Egypt during the Arab Spring. The impact downstream hasn't been properly assessed, and although the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD, won't extract water when it's finished, filling it too quickly will reduce the flow downstream. And there's a trust issue. Ethiopia can now control the river.
It's very much a game changer. Now Ethiopia, for the first time, is combining both, the physical power of being an upstream country that can actually sort of, in a way or another, control the Nile flow, and the economic power of being able to construct a dam depending on its own domestic resources. So, yeah, it's an indication, it's a manifestation that, well, the power balance is changing in the region, economically, politically, and strategically as well.
The last stretch of the river runs through the Nile Delta, the centre of Egypt's agricultural production, where its famous cotton is grown alongside many other crops, including rice, a notoriously thirsty crop. Irrigating fields by flooding them is one reason so much water's wasted. The delta is sinking as the dams upstream stop the fertile silt from replenishing the land, the very reason the Nile floodplains were so productive to begin with. It's now polluted with chemicals and waste. Fish are dying and people are getting poorer. Salt water is moving gradually upstream. It's sad to see how this great river ends up.
Well, this is it. This is where the River Nile reaches the end of its long journey. This behind me is the Mediterranean Sea. You can see the waves coming in. This is now salt water. Whatever Egypt says or does, Ethiopia is building this dam. It's not an idea or a plan, it's a thing. It can already control the flow of the River Nile. Egypt's always been strong enough to dominate the countries upstream, but that's changing. In terms of talk of war, well, that's always a very self-defeating and foolish thing to do to solve a political crisis. And everyone we've spoken to, no one thinks that that's going to happen. But this is a really serious problem, and it needs to be sorted out quickly.
The Nile is the place where the world's first war over water can be avoided. This could even become a model of how countries can learn to share great rivers. But for now, it's up to Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt to navigate tensions on the world's longest river.